Chapter 8, Section 3, Example 5. There's a little note here before we go on to Example 5, which is, I've kind of talked about this. He said, you want to find similarities, those kind of things. You can kind of drill into the complex part of working with some of these word problems and forget some of the easier parts, and I've talked about that. And he said, well, just like this, two of the examples before, or actually 2, 3, and 4, had a sum in there that was relatively simple, and it would be easy to miss that because you get kind of drawn into the details. And especially in this next example, because mixtures have some kind of complex stuff. In fact, they're going to start drawing a lot of pictures, which is a good indication that you need to get a visualization of what's going on, because it is relatively hard for most people to see exactly what you need to do with these kinds of problems. And that's a tip that they give here when solving a problem. See if it's patterned or modeled after another problem that you've already solved. And I'll caution that with the fact that I've worked with students, and especially in this Math 93 stuff, is that you can take that the wrong way and say, well, I want to find a similar problem and follow exactly the same steps, so you can try to memorize a step-by-step pattern. The key is to understand the concepts, where we're going, those kinds of things, which I do talk a lot about. So let's look at example 5. This is a mixture problem, and let's go through this. And the familiarization that they do with this is extensive. I mean, they went to the point of drawing some nice little pictures of containers and all that kind of stuff, because it's real key to get the general idea of what's going on here. And what we're doing is, this type of problem is you have a solution that has a certain percentage of a mix into that, and and you're going to mix these two things together and do that. With, if we had like mixtures with alcohol in that, it would be probably pretty good if you're going to take certain proof things and mix them together to know exactly how much alcohol you're consuming, especially if you're going to drive a car later, right? So it's kind of in that nature. This usually has to do with farm or agricultural based stuff, when they're going to be mixing some pre-made products. So let's look at this. It says Nature's Green Gardening carries 2 brands of fertilizer containing nitrogen and water. Gentle Grow is 3% nitrogen and Sunsaver is 8% nitrogen. Nature's Green needs to combine the two types of solution into a 90-liter mixture. So they give us a volume and they give you how much, right? That is 6% nitrogen. And this is pretty real world application. The loan deal we went through, usually you kind of know what the loan amounts are, and then you figure out interest. So having this interest idea and then trying to figure out the loan amounts was kind of not as real world. But this really is. I mean, they'll have, they did some soil testing. They say, hey, you need to put something on here that's going to put about a 6% nitrogen solution into this and I'll probably actually talked about how much liquid should be put onto that too. So then it's asking, how do I make that mixture? How much of each brand do I do to make that happen? Well, to familiarize with this, we must consider not only the size of the mixture, but also its strength. So let's look at these pictures that they're showing us here. It says, in order to have a 90-meter mixture of Gentle Grow and Sunsaver, there's 2 things must be true, and the one that's easier is the first one again. Here's that sum, that simple sum thing here. If I say Gentle Grow, we're going to define the variable, let's call it G, and S for Sunsaver, so it's easy to remember which one's which. this equation should be still pretty easy. I need to have a certain amount of each liquid in liters that's going to add up to 90 liters. So I get G plus S equals 90. This one is the tougher one, and we're going to look at this a couple different ways. And this other one is we're going to have some amount of gentle grow that is 3%, and it's going to be added to some amount of sun saver that is 8%, and then we're going to end up with 90 liters of something of this new mixture that's 6%. And what they're saying here, and this is a real key component here, is rather than think about what the total volume is, which they do give us, right, is what is the total volume of just nitrogen. So we're going to say, let's first forget about, you know, how much water is in this thing, and let's concentrate on the nitrogen level. And that's what they're doing here. They say, well, if I want to know the amount of nitrogen that is in this mixture, I can figure that out. It's kind of like the it's pretty similar to this other one, but it's a kind of a different focus where we're going like, well, you know, what are we talking about? I could actually do it with water too and say 94% of it's water. But what they're doing is say, if we thought about what 6% of this 90 liters, there is actually 5.4 liters of nitrogen. That's this yellowish portion here. And then I'd say, well, 3% of this G, what does that really tell us? Is that's kind of like, let's figure out some parts to this. You know, what if I wanted to know how much actually liters of nitrogen are there? Well, it would be the same thing if I wanted to know how many liters of nitrogen was in gentle grow. Well, if I knew how much that was, it'd be like guessing and checking. If I said I had 10 liters, it would be 3% of that, or 0.3 liters, right? And so on. So I could say, well, I could figure out the amount of liters of nitrogen in each one of these containers. And how do you do that? Well, you take this percent times the amount. Well, here I don't know the amount, so I could take 0.03 times G would tell me how much would be in this amount that I don't know, right? And 0.08 times S, this amount. So you can kind of see where they're going with how to build this this equation, because we need this other equation, right? So for each mixture illustrated below, the total amount of the mixture and the total amount of the nitrogen, they're basically saying, you know, let's look at some situations here, right? If I had 30 liters of gentle grow and 60 liters of sun saver, again, like why did they pick those numbers, right? Because they need to add up to that 90 liters. That's our first equation, right? They're asking us kind of like, well, let's do some other math problems here, and they're asking how much would the nitrogen level be for each one of these. So the first question is, well, how much mixture will I have, right? Well, that's easy. It's 90 liters. The second one says I have 10 liters of and 8 liters. How much mixture would I have again? Would be the same thing. I'd end up with 90 liters, and so on. They're basically doing that. And then the second part of this is, are there any of the mixtures below illustrate 6%? So what I could do is take what each portion that is actual nitrogen in this deal, because I would take this 30 liters, which is times 3%, I'd end up with 0.9 liters of nitrogen, and in this one I'd get 0.54 liters, and that's what they're basically saying here. And if I added those together, I would know how much nitrogen there was, and then I'd have to figure out what percent that is of the mixture, and so on. So they're really, and I don't want to do all that math. What are they really doing? It's kind of like they kind of set it up for us first to understand it. But you probably would have been messing around with these first, saying, well, how do I know how to get this to be 6%, and so on. Now they translate this, excuse me, to let G equal the liters of Gentle Grow, right, and S the number of Sunsaver. And then they start with this table again. These tables are very good to organize this because it's very easy to get mixed up in this realm of this deal. So they list the percent of nitrogen that's going to occur in each one, right? They tell us 3% in Gentle Grow and 8% in Sunsaver, and our mixture needs to be 6%. Well, that's where they go first. They say, well, how much nitrogen is in this mixture? Well, I take 90 times 6%, I get 5.4 liters. When I set that up, I can get to here and say, well, to find out how much nitrogen is in Gentle Grow, I take the amount, which I don't know, that's why I have a variable for it, times 3%. I get 0.03 G. Remember, percent is just hundreds. And then Sunsaver, the same thing, so I get 0.08 times S. Well, what has to happen here is a summation, right, or a sum. I need to add those two levels or two amounts of nitrogen to add up to the amount of nitrogen that I need in the mixture, so I get that 5.4 liters. There's my second equation. So the approach is a little different than saying, well, I kind of need to calculate some things before I create the sum for this second equation, though the first equation was still pretty easy. Now again, they go through here, and I'm not going to read all this parts, but I'm going to point out some stuff. Where did they get this 3G plus 8S plus 540? What did they do? They cleared the decimals again by multiplying both sides by 100 in this case. Very good strategy, especially if you're going to use elimination. Then I'm going to manipulate again, and I can use, first strategy was using the multiplication principle to clear decimals, but then I can use the multiplication principle again by multiplicating this first equation times -3. Why? Because this makes these additive inverses of each other. So the goal again is to get the equation down to one variable. I can solve for that one variable. Then I use substitution into probably the easier equation to use, which is that sum equal to 90. And I end up with the Sunsaver being 54 and G being 36. And what does this mean now? We've got to remember, what did we define these variables to be? And it says, remember, G is the number of liters of Gentle Grow. I could see very easily you're going to, well, is this the amount of nitrogen in something? Or is this, those kind of things, you kind of fall back to some of the steps you did to create your equation. But remember how you defined the variable. It was the number of liters of Gentle Grow and the number of liters of Sunsaver. And that's why they really put that in there. They say, hey, you got to remember what those variables mean. So we check that. Well, does 54 plus 36 equal 90? Yes. And then I can check to see if I get my correct amount of nitrogen to do that. And then there's the next step, is what does percent mean? And I'm going to talk about that in a little more detail. But first I go back to my second equation. 3% of 36 plus 8% of 54 should equal 5.4. But that's how much nitrogen we calculated should be in my 90 liters. I still want to check one thing. Does that really make a 6% solution? Well, 5.4 out of 90 is a ratio, and fraction or percents are ratios. So what they're saying is, how can I write 5.4 over 90 as some number over 6, or 6 over 100, right? That's what percent means. Well, you could just divide, right, or put that into a decimal form, and you're going to get 0.6 and 0.06, excuse me, which is 600ths. Or you could do the fractional part of that. But this last part of the check would be something that you could have checked up here when I actually figured out that 5.4, but I actually multiplied 6% times 90 to get 5.4. Really what they're doing at the end of this is saying, well, if I took 5.4 and divided by 90, do I actually get 6%? Then, again, make sure you answer the question. They're asking not, do these make these percentages or whatever else. They want to know how much of each type of nitrogen fertilizer do I use. So it's 36 liters of Gentle Grow and 54 liters of Sun Saver.